The battlefield lay in ruined smoke and dust choking the air as debris littered the ground, and he crouched behind a shattered wall, muscles tense and heart pounding from the relentless firestorm that had just passed, and he thought it was over. The enemy scattered the last pockets of resistance, and the deafening roar of artillery faded, leaving only the ringing in his ears, and the faint smell of burnt metal and scorched earth scanned the horizon, squinting through the haze, searching for movement. Anything that would signal the fight was not done yet, but all he saw were empty trenches and broken vehicles and a silence that felt unnatural and heavy, and he let himself breathe for a moment, letting the adrenaline recede, only to realize that something in the distance had shifted, a shadow moving where none should be, and he froze instinctively, knowing that in war shadows could be deadly. The wind carried a low hum, barely audible at first, a vibration through the soles of his boots that set his nerves on edge, and he felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck, a warning instinct honed by years in combat, and he glanced to the sky, a faint silhouette appearing against the clouds, the shape of a fighter, almost indistinct yet familiar, and the memory of that roar came flooding back, a sound that had been etched into his mind from countless battles, and he realized with a jolt that the fight might not be over after all. Then he saw it clearly, an A10 limping low across the battlefield, its wings shredded, the metal torn and smoking in a jagged line that glinted in the harsh sun, and his stomach dropped as he watched the aircraft struggle against gravity and wind, yet maintain an almost impossible stability, while the pilot maneuvered with precision and determination, and a part of him could not believe what he was seeing, that something so broken could still fight. The enemy, who had retreated moments before, seemed to hesitate as the aircraft came into view, its presence commanding and terrifying all at once, and he realized that the shredded wing did not diminish its power, it seemed to amplify it, a testament to the courage and skill of the pilot who refused to yield, and he felt a surge of hope mixed with awe, because in that moment it was clear the tide could shift again and the battle was far from finished. Explosions echoed faintly in the distance, sending clouds of smoke into the sky, and the ground trembled beneath his boots, reminding him that the battlefield had not forgotten them, and he pressed his back against the shattered wall, muscles coiled ready to move. The enemy could return at any second, and the A10 cutting low across the sky was now a symbol of salvation or destruction, depending on how quickly they adapted to its presence, and the shadow it cast seemed larger than life across the ruined earth. Watched as the aircraft banked sharply, dropping low over a cluster of enemy positions, and rounds tore through the makeshift barricades, sending men scrambling and debris tumbling, and he felt his pulse spike with adrenaline, because the shredded wing should have slowed it down, should have made it easy to target, yet it was not slowing the destruction, it was raining down. And every second it remained in the air altered the course of the fight and forced him to rethink every movement he had made. The roar of the engines filled the canyon like thunder rolling through the earth, shaking loose dirt and small stones, and he ducked instinctively, feeling the wind blast his face as the A10 strafed another ridge, a plume of fire and smoke following its path, and he could see the enemy hesitating, uncertain whether to continue their advance or retreat further, and in that hesitation he realized the pilot was not only fighting the enemy but challenging fate itself with each maneuver and every calculated pass. He risked a glance around him, the terrain littered with obstacles, broken vehicles, and smoldering trenches, and he realized they were sitting in the perfect position to either survive or be wiped out completely, and the shredded A10 above was the only thing keeping the enemy pinned down, and he felt a mixture of awe and fear, because one mistake, one movement at the wrong moment could undo everything, and the pilot's courage seemed to hang over them like a shield forged from fire and metal. The enemy regrouped slowly, at first moving into cover behind crumbling walls and the remnants of armored vehicles, and he knew they were waiting for a moment to strike again, calculating the movement of the seals below, and the low-flying A10 seemed almost to anticipate their thoughts, descending with calculated ferocity to cut off every advantage, and he realized that this was not merely a battle of firepower, but a war of wills, each side testing the limits of endurance and courage, and he had to match the intensity if they hoped to survive as their craft dipped dangerously low, a shredded wing trailing sparks and smoke, and he could see the strain as it maneuvered through the canyon, its guns blazing, cutting paths through enemy fortifications, and he swallowed hard, knowing the pilot was risking everything with every pass, relying on skill, instinct, and sheer willpower, and the battlefield seemed to bend around it, the very air charged with the tension of life or death, and he could not tear his eyes away from the incredible display of defiance. A sudden flare of light erupted from a distant ridge, signaling the enemy had attempted to regroup or fire a hidden weapon, and he instinctively dove behind cover, the roar of gunfire and rounds striking the earth around him, sending dirt and debris into the air, and the A10 reacted instantly, banking, sharply strafing the new threat, and he felt his stomach twist, because even with the shredded wing, the aircraft was responding faster than anything humanly possible, almost alive in its fury and precision. Risked another glance up, seeing the pilot maneuver with a skill that defied logic, one wing almost useless, yet maintaining speed and targeting with deadly accuracy, and he felt a surge of hope pulse through his veins, because it was clear the pilot was not giving up, and in that decision alone the fight could continue, the enemy could be broken, and the men on the ground had a chance to survive, yet every second carried the risk of catastrophe, and the battlefield was still unforgiving. A10 released a salvo, tearing through barricades and trenches, and the smoke hung in the air as small fires started across the battlefield, and he could see the enemy scrambling desperately, trying to avoid the onslaught, and he realized that the shredded wing was a metaphor for their own situation. Vulnerable yet refusing to surrender, and every movement seemed to inspire a silent courage in him and the men with him, because it was impossible not to believe that they could survive if they moved as one. With the aircraft above, a rubble tumbled as a round struck a nearby wall, sending dust into his eyes, and he blinked rapidly, wiping the grit from his face as the A10 made another pass, strafing enemy positions, cutting their numbers, and he could hear the faint cries of retreat and defeat mingling with the roar of engines and the smell of smoke, and he realized that the pilot was not just fighting the enemy, but time itself pushing against every limit, and every calculated pass forced the SEALs to act faster than they ever had. He signaled to his team crouching behind cover, pointing to a narrow corridor through the debris where they could advance, while relying on the aircraft to suppress enemy fire, and they moved cautiously, each step measured with precision, every motion guided by instinct and training, and the shredded A10 continued its relentless passes above, shredding the enemy positions and inspiring the men below to press forward despite exhaustion and fear, and every shadow seemed alive with potential danger. Enemy fired sporadically, attempting to regain control, the rounds kicking up dust around their feet, and he ducked low, waiting for the roar of the aircraft to pass, and it responded immediately, a whirlwind of fire and fury descending low and fast, cutting off the enemy advance, and he realized with a jolt that this was more than a battle, it was a test of endurance, will, and coordination, and every second could tip the balance in either direction. The canyon walls seemed to echo the roar of the engines, amplifying the tension as the A10 banked sharply over the ridge, strafing hidden positions, while sparks flew from the shredded wing, and he felt his heart hammering in his chest, knowing the pilot was risking everything to protect them, and the enemy had nowhere safe to hide, and he realized that this was the moment that would define whether they survived or fell completely, and the battlefield held its breath, waiting for the next move. Risked a glance to the left, seeing movement, a group of enemy fighters attempting to flank them, and he signaled to his men to open fire, covering the corridor, while the A10 responded with pinpoint precision, cutting the enemy down, and he felt an almost surreal awe as he watched the aircraft struggle with a broken wing yet dominate the battlefield, and every pass it made seemed to lift their spirits while reminding them that they were still vulnerable and nothing was guaranteed. The smoke thickened, obscuring parts of the battlefield, The sunlight reflected off twisted metal and debris, and he pressed his back against the wall waiting for the aircraft to make its next pass, and it came screaming across the sky, engines roaring, guns blazing, a shredded wing trailing sparks yet. It moved with a terrifying grace, and he realized that the pilot was holding them alive with sheer force of will, and every movement inspired a courage they did not know they still had. He could feel sweat dripping down his face, the heat from explosions, and the roar of engines mixing in a haze of adrenaline and terror, and he knew that this battle was far from over yet. With every pass of the A10 he saw the enemy falter, the courage and the pilot triumph. The battlefield stretched endlessly before them, twisted metal and broken earth scattering shadows across the terrain, and he moved cautiously, signaling his team forward, every step measured and deliberate, knowing that the enemy could be regrouping at any moment and that the A10 above with its shredded wing was their only lifeline against annihilation, and the roar of its engines echoed in the canyons like a living beast ready to strike again. He scanned the horizon, every ridge, every dune, for signs of movement. The enemy had vanished only to reappear in places he did not anticipate, and he felt his heart pound in anticipation because the shredded winged aircraft above was holding them in a delicate balance between life and death. And the moment they miscalculated, the entire battlefield could erupt in fire and chaos, and they would have nowhere to hide from the wrath of the enemy or the fury of combat. Suddenly a plume of smoke erupted from a distant ridge, signaling enemy forces attempting to regain ground, and he shouted to his men to take cover while the A10 twisted and dove low, unleashing cannon fire that shredded the enemy positions, sending men scrambling and vehicles toppling, and he pressed against the broken, while feeling the shockwave rattle his bones as the aircraft executed impossible maneuvers, and he realized that the pilot was defying odds in ways that no ordinary soldier could survive on the ground. The enemy fired sporadically, attempting to flank them from the left and right, yet the shredded winged A10 twisted through the air, banking sharply over ridges, spraying fire with precision, and he signaled his team to advance through the narrow corridor opened by the aircraft, its guns blazing a path through destruction, and he felt adrenaline surge as each step forward was calculated against the timing of the aircraft above and the uncertainty of what lay beyond. Each ridge of debris and dust filled the air as rounds from the enemy ricocheted around their position, and he crouched low behind a fractured wall, his muscles coiled ready to spring, while the A10 roared overhead, its shredded wing trailing sparks and smoke, yet it moved with terrifying grace and determination, cutting off enemy positions, and he realized that the aircraft itself had become a force that dictated the flow of battle, forcing both sides to react to its presence, and every pass it made inspired both fear and hope. A sudden flare of light erupted to the north, a mortar or explosive detonating, sending dirt and rocks into the air, and he dove instinctively, feeling the vibration through the ground, and the A10 reacted instantly, banking low and unleashing a salvo that turned the ridge into a wall of fire and smoke, and he saw enemy fighters scattering, desperately searching for cover, and he knew that every second counted because the next wave could descend faster than they anticipated and leave them trapped in the open. Shredded wing quivered as the aircraft twisted, sharply evading debris and enemy fire, and he marveled at the skill required to keep it airborne, moving like a predator across the battlefield, and he signaled his team forward, moving from cover to cover, counting each step as though it could mean the difference between life and death, and the roar of the engines above became a rhythm he could follow, a guide through the chaos that threatened to overwhelm them. The enemy regrouped slowly, attempting to fire from hidden trenches and crumbling walls, and he knew that if they hesitated even a moment, they could be cut down, and the A10 came screaming low, strafing their positions, a tornado of fire and sparks trailing from the shredded wing, and he ducked instinctively, feeling the heat of the rounds and the shaking of the earth, and every motion above inspired the SEALs to push forward, knowing that the aircraft above was the only shield between them and annihilation. Risked a glance over the ridge, seeing small groups of enemy fighters attempting to flank them, and he shouted instructions, moving the team with precise coordination, while the A10 twisted and banked again, raining destruction upon the enemy, its guns blazing a wall of steel and fire, and he realized that the aircraft was defying death itself, its shredded wing barely holding together while it continued to dominate the battlefield, and every second it remained above them was another chance to survive. Smoke and dust swirled around the team as they advanced, the ground littered with debris and destroyed vehicles, and he felt the tension coil in his chest because the enemy had not given up. Their determination was still present in every movement, every shadow, and the A-10 made another impossible pass, trailing sparks and fire from the shredded wing, obliterating another ridge, and the SEALs moved forward, using the temporary distraction to navigate the treacherous terrain. Suddenly, a hail of gunfire erupted from a ridge behind them, forcing them to duck low while rounds kicked up dirt and debris, and the A-10 banked sharply in response, diving low with terrifying speed, cutting down the attackers in a storm of fire, and he felt the heat from the aircraft's cannon wash over him like a wave as he realized that the pilot above was fighting a war of endurance, defying physics and odds, and that the shredded wing made every pass even more miraculous and every second more suspenseful, signal to the team to advance across an exposed stretch of sand littered with twisted metal and smoke rising from destroyed vehicles, and the A-10 roared overhead, trailing fire and sparks from the torn wings, spraying the enemy with precision, and he felt adrenaline spike knowing that one misstep, one delayed movement could leave them exposed, and every motion had to sync with the timing of the aircraft above and the shifting patterns of enemy fire, and he wondered how long the aircraft could hold together before it's damaged. Wing failed, explosions rocked the ground, sending clouds of dust into the air, and he pressed low, feeling the shockwave vibrate through his bones as the A-10 twisted, impossibly banking low and strafing every ridge the enemy attempted to use for cover. And he knew instinctively that the aircraft was holding them alive, buying time while forcing the enemy into mistakes, and that every pass changed the dynamics of the battlefield, forcing both sides to adapt to the shredded wing that seemed to possess a will of its own. The enemy scattered into the remaining trenches and crumbling walls, attempting to find some foothold, while the SEALs used cover and coordinated bursts of fire to advance toward a safer position, and the A-10 cut across the sky, again trailing smoke and sparks from the damaged wing, and every burst of cannon fire cleared another path through the chaos, and he realized that survival depended on perfect coordination, timing, and trust in the aircraft above, because it was their shield and their sword all at one. Seethe wind whipped through the canyon, carrying dust and the smell of smoke as he moved cautiously, signaling his men forward, while rounds from the enemy kicked up dirt at their feet, and the A-10 came low again, strafing the highest concentrations of enemy fighters, trailing sparks and smoke from its shredded wing, and he realized with growing awe that the pilot above was risking everything, and that every maneuver could mean the difference between life and death for those on the ground ducked behind a fractured wall as rounds exploded near his feet, and the A-10 twisted, impossibly diving low and cutting through enemy positions with terrifying precision, and he felt adrenaline surge, knowing the aircraft above with its shredded wing was the only reason they were still advancing, and he understood that this was no ordinary fight. This was a battle of endurance, courage, and trust in forces that seemed impossible yet necessary, and every second held suspense as the shredded wing held against the impossible. The battlefield seemed to pulse with the roar of engine smoke and fire as the A-10 made another pass, trailing sparks and bullets slicing through the enemy positions, and he moved his team forward inch by inch, using every shadow and every piece of cover as the aircraft above orchestrated destruction and protection simultaneously, and he realized that the pilot above was not just fighting the enemy, but fate itself holding them all alive on the edge of chaos and survival. A sudden flash of light erupted from a ridge, signaling a hidden enemy position attempting to ambush the SEALs, and he dove low, feeling the vibration through the ground, and the A-10 responded instantly, twisting low, releasing a torrent of fire and destruction, scattering the enemy and leaving a trail of smoke and sparks from its shredded wing, and he realized that the aircraft above was holding the line for them in ways he could not have imagined, and every second of its flight matter risked a glance at the shredded wing trailing sparks across the sky and felt a mix of awe, fear, and determination because the aircraft above was fighting as much against its own damage as the enemy below, and the SEALs moved forward, taking advantage of every pass, knowing that each one was a fleeting opportunity to survive, and every motion had to be synchronized with the timing of the aircraft above and the shifting patterns of enemy fire, and he wondered if they could make it through before the wing gave out. Smoke thickened, the air dust filled their eyes, and ears rang with explosions, and the roar of the A10 engines shook the canyon, and he pressed forward, signaling the team to advance as the shredded winged aircraft made another pass, cutting down enemy positions, and he felt a surge of hope tempered with fear, knowing that every second counted and that the pilot above was risking everything to keep them alive, and that the battle was far from over. The battlefield stretched before them, endless and chaotic, smoke and fire rising from every ridge and crater, and he pressed forward with his team, every muscle coiled ready for the next attack, knowing that the A10 above with its shredded wing was their only protection, and every second without its cover could mean death, and he felt the weight of responsibility crushing his chest as he moved across the ruined terrain. The roar of the engines overhead was a constant drumbeat guiding their movements, signaling when to advance and when to hold, and the shredded wing trailing sparks and smoke was a testament to the courage and skill of the pilot fighting against impossible odds, and he realized that their survival depended entirely on the timing of each pass and the destruction the aircraft delivered to the enemy positions ahead, and the battlefield seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next strike. Enemy forces began to regroup at the far ridge, small groups emerging cautiously from cover, attempting to flank the SEALs, and he signaled his men to prepare suppressive fire while the A10 twisted low, weaving through the sky, strafing the ridge with precision, and each pass shredded the enemy lines and disrupted their coordination. And he felt adrenaline surge through his veins as he realized that the aircraft above was not just fighting but controlling the battlefield, and every second it remained aloft was a chance to advance. Explosions rocked the canyon as rounds struck the earth around them, kicking up dirt and debris, and he ducked low, feeling the vibrations travel through his boots, while the A10 banked sharply, cutting a path through the enemy, forcing them back into trenches, and he realized that each maneuver the aircraft made was a delicate balance of aggression and survival, its shredded wing burning and trailing sparks, and he could not imagine how the pilot maintained such control, and every pass left him and his team hanging on the edge of life. And Devi risked a glance at the enemy, attempting to regroup, a sniper team hidden among rubble and twisted metal ready to pick off anyone exposed, and he shouted instructions, signaling the team to move forward while the A10 twisted low, roaring like a predator above, firing rounds with precision, and the shredded wing trembled with every sharp turn, and he realized that the pilot was risking everything to protect them, and every second held suspense because one miscalculation could cost all their lives. The team advanced cautiously across the exposed ground, using broken walls and debris for cover, while the A10 strafed every ridge, keeping the enemy pinned down, and he felt the heat from the cannon fire as sparks and shrapnel flew past them, and the shredded wing above seemed impossibly fragile yet impossibly powerful, and he realized that survival depended on trust in forces beyond their control and coordination that left no room for hesitation. A sudden flare erupted from the far ridge, signaling the enemy's last attempt to hold ground, and he dove behind cover while the A10 twisted low, releasing a torrent of fire, ripping through enemy trenches and sending men scrambling in every direction, and the shredded wing trailing sparks above seemed almost alive in its determination to dominate the battlefield, and he realized with awe that they were witnessing something impossible made real through courage and skill. Signaled his team forward, moving from cover to cover, each step calculated and precise, while the A10 twisted and dove across the battlefield with terrifying accuracy, cutting down the enemy's last strongholds, and he felt a surge of hope tempered by exhaustion, knowing that every second could shift the outcome of the battle, and the aircraft above with its shredded wing was the difference between survival and annihilation, and the canyon echoed with the roar of engines and explosions. Semi-fire erupted again from hidden trenches and crumbling walls, and he ducked low, feeling the dirt and debris scatter around him, while the A-10 banked sharply, twisting low and firing rounds with precision, cutting off every attempt at regrouping, and he realized that the aircraft above was holding them alive, orchestrating destruction and protection at the same time, and every pass seemed to defy the laws of physics as the shredded wing trembled and sparks flew with every maneuver. The SEALs pressed forward, using every piece of cover, inching toward a safer position, while the enemy tried desperately to mount a last stand, and the A-10 twisted overhead, trailing fire and smoke from the damaged wing, raining destruction with lethal accuracy, and he realized that the pilot above was fighting a war of endurance and courage as much as a war against the enemy, and every second that wing held together was a second they had to live. Smoke thickened the air, filling their lungs and stinging their eyes as the A-10 made another impossibly low pass, strafing the highest concentrations of enemy fighters, and he signaled his men forward across exposed ground, using every shadow, every piece of cover, and the shredded wing above trailed sparks with every turn and every dive, and he felt a pulse of hope mixed with fear, because the aircraft was keeping them alive and the enemy at bay. Yet one misstep could end everything. Explosions and gunfire rocked the canyon as debris flew into the air, and he pressed his back against a shattered wall, signaling the team to move, while the A-10 roared low, twisting and banking, raining fire down across the enemy positions, and the shredded wing burned and trailed sparks with each maneuver, and he realized that survival depended entirely on perfect coordination, timing, and trust in the aircraft above, and every second held suspense as the line between life and death narrowed. With enemy scattered, desperate to escape the relentless assault, while the SEALs moved forward inch by inch, covering each other, and the A-10 twisted low, cutting through the final ridges, trailing fire and sparks from the damaged wing, and he felt adrenaline surge as he realized that the aircraft was fighting a battle beyond human limits, and that their survival rested on the courage and skill of the pilot above, and every pass altered the battlefield in ways that forced both sides to adapt. Instant life risked a glance across the canyon, seeing small groups of enemy fighters attempting to regroup behind broken walls and crumbled vehicles, and he signaled his team to open fire, while the A-10 twisted low, firing rounds with precision, cutting down the enemy, and he felt awe and fear as the shredded wing above fought against gravity and destruction itself, keeping them alive, while each pass drew the enemy closer to complete collapse, and every second they moved was measured against the aircraft above. Smoke and fire rose from every ridge as the A-10 made another dive low, trailing sparks and rounds across the battlefield, and he pressed his team forward, using every piece of cover, every shadow, to reach the extraction point, while the enemy tried desperately to mount a counterattack, and the shredded wing held steady above, moving with impossible skill and courage, and he realized that the aircraft was not just a weapon, it was a lifeline and a symbol of defiance. Suddenly a mortar exploded, sending dirt and rocks into the air, and he ducked instinctively, feeling the vibration through the ground, while the A-10 twisted sharply, responding immediately, strafing the ridge with pinpoint accuracy, sending the enemy scattering, and the shredded wing trembled and glowed with sparks. Yet the aircraft maintained terrifying control, and he realized that the pilot above was risking everything, and that every second they survived depended entirely on its relentless presence. SEALs moved forward inch by inch across exposed terrain, using broken walls and debris, while the A-10 twisted overhead, cutting off enemy positions, and he felt the heat and vibration from the rounds and explosions around him, and the shredded wing above burned, trailing sparks, yet moved with precision and grace, and he realized that the aircraft was holding them alive and orchestrating the battlefield as both shield and weapon, and every second carried suspense and danger. Enemy forces tried desperately to regroup behind cover, while the SEALs advanced, moving with calculated precision, and the A-10 twisted low, strafing Every ridge raining destruction with terrifying accuracy, and the shredded wing burned trailing sparks and smoke with every maneuver, and he realized that survival depended on trust, coordination, and timing, and the courage of a single pilot above, who refused to quit despite impossible odds, and every pass pushed them closer to safety. Finally, the extraction helicopters appeared hovering above the canyon, their rotors slicing the smoke-filled air, and he signaled the team forward, moving across the last stretch of exposed ground, while the A-10 twisted low, providing final cover, its shredded wing trailing sparks with every maneuver, and the enemy scattered in defeat and confusion, and he felt a surge of relief knowing that the aircraft above had given them the chance to reach safety, and every second of its flight had kept them alive. As the SEALs boarded the helicopters one by one, the A-10 made one last pass, cutting through the remaining enemy positions, trailing fire and sparks from the damaged wing, and he watched in awe as the aircraft fought until the very last second, defying physics and exhaustion, and he realized that their survival was owed entirely to the courage and skill above, and the battlefield slowly fell silent as the helicopters lifted off, carrying them away from destruction, and death's sun rose over the canyon, revealing twisted metal, burned earth, and scattered bodies, and he looked up one last time, seeing the A-10 vanish into the horizon, its shredded wings still intact against all odds, and he felt a mixture of relief, awe, and gratitude, knowing that they had survived because of a fighter who refused to quit, and that the battle would be remembered not only